I build canoes, not as a hobby, not as a weekend project I post about online, as a living. My name is Nathan Colquhoun, and for the last 4 years, I have been doing it out of a converted garage on a quarter-acre lot in Almonte, Ontario, a small town about 40 minutes west of Ottawa, on the Mississippi River. The river is not the one you are thinking of. It is smaller, quieter, and in October it turns the color of weak tea. I paddled it alone the autumn my marriage ended, and I decided that if I was going to stay in a town this size, I needed a reason that had nothing to do with her. The canoes gave me that. I build them from cedar strip mostly, occasionally white pine if a customer asks for it. Each one takes about 3 months from the first strip to the last coat of epoxy, and I sell maybe 4 or 5 a year. The rest of my income comes from repairs and the odd commission from outfitters up near Algonquin. It is not a comfortable living. It is a real one. I had been divorced from Sandra for 14 months when Ren showed up at my door on a Wednesday evening in late September. I knew Ren the way you know the people who drift through someone else's life and occasionally cross into yours. She was Sandra's cousin on her mother's side, 3 years younger than Sandra, which made her 34 to my 39. I had met her at the wedding, ours, where she had given a short toast that was genuinely funny and not at all rehearsed sounding. I had met her again at Christmas 2 years later, and at a birthday dinner for Sandra's mother the spring before everything fell apart. Each time, we had talked easily in the way that people do when they are not trying to impress each other and have no particular reason to be guarded. After the divorce, I assumed I would never see her again. She was standing on my front step with a duffel bag over one shoulder and a look on her face that I can only describe as the face a person makes when they have decided to ask for something and are already bracing for the answer. "I know this is strange," she said. "I know I should have called." I told her she could come in. She sat at the kitchen table while I made tea, loose leaf, because the bags Ansgar had always bought were one of the small things I had quietly stopped buying after she left, and she told me what had happened. She and a man named Paul had been engaged for 8 months. They had put a deposit on a venue in Kingston, a restored farmhouse on the water, and had sent invitations to 64 people. 3 weeks before the wedding, she had found a string of messages on his phone that made it clear he had been seeing someone else for most of the year. Not a one-time thing. A sustained, deliberate, parallel life. She had left his apartment that same night with what she could carry. She had gone to her mother's in Brockville for 2 weeks, and then her mother's house had started to feel like a waiting room for a grief she was not ready to process on someone else's schedule. Her best friend in Toronto had a 2-bedroom condo and a new baby and a husband who worked from home. Her apartment in Kingston had been sublet because she and Paul had planned to move into his place after the wedding. "I have nowhere left to go," she said. "That's not me being dramatic. That is actually my situation." I asked her how she had known where I lived. She said Sandra had mentioned it once, the town, the thing with the canoes. She had looked me up. She had driven 2.5 hours from Brockville on a Wednesday because she could not think of another option that did not feel like it would cost her something she did not have left to spend. I told her she could stay in the spare room. The spare room had, until recently, held 2 unpainted dressers I had been meaning to refinish, a cardboard box of Sandra's books she had never picked up, and a set of cross-country skis I had not used in 3 years. I had cleared it out the previous month for no reason I could name at the time, only that it had started to bother me every time I walked past it. I had put a bed frame together with a mattress I ordered online and a lamp from the second-hand shop on Bridge Street. Ren looked at the room and said it was perfect. She said it the way people say something is perfect when they mean it. She was a physiotherapist. She had been working at a clinic in Kingston and had already called her supervisor to say she needed 2 weeks of personal leave. They had approved it. She was not, she told me, a person who fell apart. She was a person who needed a pause that was not being observed by anyone who loved her, and therefore felt obligated to have opinions about what she should do next. I understood that completely. The first few days she mostly stayed out of my way, which I appreciated more than I would have expected. She woke up before I did and made coffee, real coffee, not the instant stuff I had been drinking since the divorce, and she left a cup on the counter by the time I came in from the garage for my morning break. She did not leave notes with it. She did not hover, she just left the cup. On the 4th day she came out to the garage while I was dry fitting a set of cedar strips along the form and watched for a while without saying anything. Most people who visit the garage ask immediately how long it takes or how much one costs. Ren watched for about 10 minutes and then asked how I decided where to put the accent strip. I showed her. The accent strip runs along the center of the hull, a contrasting wood, usually a darker cedar or sometimes walnut, that gives the canoe its visual spine. The placement is partially geometric and partially intuition built from repetition. She nodded like the answer made sense. After that, she started spending time in the garage most afternoons, not working, not helping unless I asked, just present. She would sit on the wooden stool beside the window with a book or her phone, and occasionally ask a question that showed she had been paying attention. It was, I realized after a while, the most comfortable I had felt in my own space since Sandra had left. There was an afternoon in early October when the power went out across the whole of Lanark County, a transformer fire somewhere near Perth. We lit candles and ate the soup I had made the day before, cold because neither of us wanted to risk the propane stove in the dark, and we talked for 3 hours at the kitchen table. She told me about growing up in Brockville, the second daughter of a woman who expressed love through logistics, who made sure everyone had enough socks and their car had winter tires, and their health cards were up to date. She told me about the first time she knew she wanted to be a physio, which was after a cycling accident at 17 that took 8 months of rehabilitation, and how her physio at the time had never once made her feel like a body being fixed but like a person being listened to. I told her about Almonte, about why I had stayed after Sandra left, when the obvious thing would have been to go back to Ottawa. I told her it was because the river was here, and because small towns hold a particular kind of quiet that I had been looking for without knowing it. She said she thought she understood that. I asked her at some point in the second hour whether she had talked to Sandra since she arrived. She looked at the candle between us for a moment before she answered. "Sandra and I haven't been close in a few years," she said. "Since before your divorce. That's not something I've talked about with a lot of people." I did not push, but the answer stayed with me. She had been there for 11 days when Sandra called me. Not texted, called. I stepped outside to take it, standing on the narrow strip of concrete at the side of the garage where I go to think. Sandra asked how I was doing in the way that means something else. And then, before I could answer the thing she actually meant, she said she had heard from her mother that Ren might be in the area. I told her Ren was staying with me for a bit while she sorted some things out. There was a pause on the line that I have turned over in my mind many times since. "Why would she go to you?" Sandra said. I said I didn't know that she had needed a place and I had a spare room. Another pause. "How long has she been there?" 11 days. The silence this time was different, shorter and harder. Sandra said she was going to come by on the weekend. I did not argue with her, but after I hung up, I went back inside and told Ren that Sandra had called. I told her Sandra was planning to come on the weekend. I told her this immediately, standing in the kitchen doorway with my work gloves still on, because it had become clear to me over 11 days that Ren was not the kind of person who should have information about her own life withheld from her. Ren sat with it for a moment. "She's going to try to take me back to my mother's," she said. Not a question. "Probably," I said. Ren looked at the counter, at the coffee maker, at the window above the sink that looked out onto the backyard. Then she looked at me. "I'm not ready to go," she said. "I'm not ready to be managed." I told her she didn't have to go anywhere. Sandra arrived on Saturday afternoon in a rented SUV. She had flown from Vancouver, where she lived now with someone she had met at work, and knocked on the front door, as though she had never had a key to it, which she no longer did. I answered the door. We have what I would describe as a civil relationship, Sandra and I. Not warm, not resentful, just clear. We know what happened between us, which was mostly that we had wanted different things, and had both waited too long to say so, and we have arrived at something that does not require ongoing explanation. She looked well. She looked like someone who had sorted herself out. I told her Ren was in the backyard. She went through the house without being invited to, the way people do when they have old maps of a place, and I followed, which I maybe should have done faster. I got to the back step in time to hear Sandra say, "Mum is worried sick. You need to come home." Sitting in the lawn chair by the cedar hedge, her hands around a mug, and she did not stand up when Sandra came out. "I'm fine," Ren said. "You're hiding at your cousin's ex-husband's house in a town no one can find on a map." "I'm not hiding," Ren said. "I'm resting." "There's a difference." "Ren, Sandra." Ren's voice was quiet. "I need you to hear me. I came here because I needed somewhere that wasn't being watched over. Nathan gave me that. I am okay. I am not ready to go back, and I am not going to go back this weekend because you've decided I should." Sandra looked at me then, as though I was going to provide something useful. I said, "It's her choice." Sandra stood in my backyard for another few seconds and I could see her making a decision about how far to push it. Sandra is a practical person at her core. She reads situations accurately and she knows when she is not going to win. She said she would call Ren tomorrow. She came back through the house and left the way she came. Ren and I sat in the backyard until the light went gray, not talking much, just listening to the river that you can hear faintly from the backyard on quiet evenings if the wind is right. She told me about the wedding 2 nights later. Not Paul's and hers, Sandra's and mine. She had been asked to do a reading, the one she had done and which I remembered as being well chosen, a short passage from a writer I liked. But she had almost not come at all. "I knew something about Sandra," she said, "before the wedding. I'd known it for about 6 months. I asked what she had known. She said that during the year leading up to our wedding, Sandra had been, in Ren's words, not entirely present in your relationship in the way she should have been. She did not go into more detail than that, and I did not ask her to. But she said she had spent those 6 months going back and forth about whether to say something to me, and had decided in the end that it was not her place, that she did not know enough for certain, that she could be wrong about what she had seen. I have wondered since," she said, "whether I made the right call. I told her she couldn't have known how things would go. I know," she said, "but I also think about the fact that you lost 4 years. I didn't lose them," I said. "They just didn't go the direction I planned." She looked at me. The kitchen light was on, and the window was dark behind her, and the coffee maker had just finished its evening cycle, which I have on a timer for 10 at night, because that is when I usually come in from the garage and want a cup before bed. "You're very patient," she said. I said I didn't know about that. I said I had just learned that most things worth doing have their own schedule. She was quiet after that, but it was a different kind of quiet than the ones before it. It was the kind where something has shifted and both people know it, and neither person is quite ready to say so. She stayed for 6 weeks. During that time, she called her clinic and extended her leave by another 2 weeks, then arranged to do some remote consultations from my kitchen table for a week after that. She found a subletter for the Kingston apartment who could take over the lease entirely, which meant she did not have to go back there. She had a conversation with Paul that she did not tell me the details of and did not seem to want to, and afterward she was quiet for a day, and then she was not. She started helping with the canoes. Small things at first, sanding, which anyone can do, and which she was meticulous about in a way that surprised me. Then the glass laying, which requires patience more than skill. Then I showed her how to mix the epoxy properly, which is one of those tasks that sounds simple but has enough variables that most people do it wrong first few times. She did it right the first time. "You're a natural," I said. She said she had good hands from the physio work. I said I believed it. There was a Friday evening in mid-November when we drove up to Pakenham for the Maple Syrup Festival that the town does every fall. Small booths, wood smoke, the kind of event that is slightly too cold and entirely worth it. And we walked around for a couple of hours without any particular agenda, stopping at the things that interested us and skipping the things that didn't. And at some point I realized that we had been walking side by side for 20 minutes without talking, and that it felt entirely natural. On the way home, she said, "I keep thinking I'm going to feel sad about Paul, and mostly I just feel relieved." I said I thought that probably meant something. "It means I knew," she said. She looked out the passenger window at the dark fields going past, the cedar stands, the odd farmhouse lit up at the end of a long driveway. "I think I knew before he did," she said very quietly, more to the glass than to me. I did not answer that, because I did not have the right answer yet. But I reached over and put my hand briefly on hers where it rested on her knee, and she turned her hand over and held it for the length of the bridge over the Mississippi, and then we were on the other side, and I needed both hands on the wheel again, and she let go. Neither of us said anything about it, but we also didn't pretend it hadn't happened. She went back to Kingston in the last week of November, not back to Paul's, not back to her sublet. She had found a short-term furnished rental near the clinic, month to month, enough space to breathe without committing to anything. The morning she left, I made breakfast. Real breakfast, eggs from the farm stand down the road, the bread I bake on Sunday mornings, because at some point, in the 6 weeks she had mentioned that she liked the smell of bread baking, and I had started doing it every week and had not said why. She ate without making a thing of it, and when she was done she rinsed her plate and put it in the rack the way she always did and went to get her bag. At the door she turned around and said, "I'm going to come back. Not, maybe I'll come back. Not, let's stay in touch." I said okay. She nodded like that was the answer she had expected and needed, and she went down the front steps to her car. I went back to the garage. She did come back. 2 weekends later, she drove out on a Saturday morning with groceries she had picked up in Carlton Place and a pair of work gloves she had bought at the hardware store in Kingston. Leather, the right weight for cold weather sanding. I did not ask about the gloves. I just made space for them on the hook by the garage door. We settled into something that had no particular name for a few months. She came out most weekends. Sometimes she stayed until Monday morning and drove straight to the clinic. We talked on the phone most evenings, not long calls, usually 15 or 20 minutes, sometimes less, just the shape of the day, what had been difficult, what had been good. In February, she started looking for work in the Ottawa Valley. She told me this on a Sunday evening matter-of-factly while we were doing the dishes. She said there was a clinic in Carlton Place that had posted a position and that she thought she might apply. I said I thought she should. "It's not because of you," she said. "I know," I said. "I mean, it's partly because of you," she said, "but mostly it's because I like it here. I like the river. I like that things are quieter." I said I understood that. "I knew you would," she said. She got the position in March. She started in April. She found a place to rent in Carlton Place, a 2-bedroom on the main street above a bookstore, 12 minutes from Almonte on the back road. She kept the work gloves on the hook in my garage. Her daughter, our daughter Rosalind, was born the following January on a Thursday, during a snowstorm that closed the highway between Ottawa and Perth and made the 20-minute drive to the hospital in Almonte take 45 minutes. Ren was calm the entire way. Calmer than I was. She sat in the passenger seat and breathed the way her physio training had apparently taught her to breathe and told me, twice, to slow down because the roads were icy. Rosalind has Ren's hands, long-fingered, precise, always doing something. She is 2.5 now, and she calls the garage the boat room, and she is not allowed past the second workbench, which is the rule, the only rule, and she follows it with the seriousness of someone who has decided the rule makes sense. Last spring I finished a canoe that I had started the autumn Ren arrived. The autumn I did not know yet what the winter would bring. It was the last one I built entirely alone. A western red cedar strip, 17 feet, a commission from an outfitter near Barry's Bay. I sent it up in April on a trailer behind a borrowed truck and paddled it once on the lake outside town before I handed it over. Ren was on the dock. When I came back in, she had Rosalind on her hip. Rosalind in the red jacket she refuses to take off even when it's too warm for it. The canoe came in quiet, the way they do when they're built right, barely a sound, just the small resistance of the water parting and closing. Ren looked at it the way she had looked at the first cedar strip in the garage, the afternoon she had stayed to watch. "It's beautiful," she said. I told her I had been meaning to build one for us. She looked at me then, not at the canoe. And there was something in her expression that I recognized without being able to name precisely. The same thing I had felt on the bridge over the Mississippi in November, that thing that had no right word but did not need one. "I know," she said. "I've been waiting."